I stared at my phone in disbelief, my coffee growing cold, as I scrolled through the wedding photos Sarah Chen had just sent me. There I was in my grandmother's vintage lace dress, laughing with Jake under the string lights we'd hung ourselves, surrounded by wildflowers and the warm glow of sunset at Riverside Community Center. The images were breathtaking, filled with genuine joy and love from everyone who had chosen to celebrate with us. But as beautiful as these moments were, they also highlighted a painful absence that had been eating at me for 3 weeks since our wedding day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My mother, Patricia, had made it crystal clear that our backyard gathering, as she dismissively called it, wasn't worthy of the Rodriguez family name. She'd spent months trying to convince us to move the ceremony to the Grand Ballroom at Hotel Magnifico in Dallas, complete with a 12-course meal and orchestra. When we refused, explaining that we wanted something intimate and meaningful rather than a show, she delivered her ultimatum with the precision of a business transaction. Emma, if you insist on this embarrassing display, don't expect your family to pretend it's acceptable. We have standards to maintain. I'd hoped she was bluffing, that her love for me would override her obsession with appearances. I was wrong. On what should have been the happiest day of my life, the entire Rodriguez side of the family was conspicuously absent from the ceremony that meant everything to Jake and me. Not my parents, not my siblings Sofia and Carlos, not even Aunt Maria who had helped raise me after my grandmother passed. Instead, our celebration was filled with Jake's warm, welcoming family, our college friends who drove hours to be there, and neighbors who barely knew us but were moved by our story. The morning after receiving Sarah's photos, I sat at our kitchen table in our small Austin apartment, still processing what had happened. Jake had left early for his job at the local veterinary clinic, giving me space to work through my emotions. The wedding had been everything we'd dreamed of, but the hollow ache of my family's rejection cast a shadow over even the most beautiful memories. I'd grown up believing that family showed up for you, no matter what. But apparently love came with conditions I'd never understood. My phone buzzed with a text from Sofia, my younger sister who had always been caught between supporting me and appeasing our mother. Mom's telling everyone you eloped to avoid a real wedding. She's showing pictures of the Johnsons' daughter's reception at the country club and saying that's what a proper celebration looks like. The message felt like a slap across the face, not because it was surprising, but because it confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Patricia wasn't just disappointed in our choices, she was actively rewriting the narrative to protect her own image. I'd spent 29 years trying to meet my mother's impossible standards, constantly adjusting myself to fit her vision of what a successful daughter should be. The engagement ring wasn't expensive enough, Jake's job wasn't prestigious enough, our apartment wasn't in the right neighborhood, and now our wedding wasn't fancy enough. Each criticism had chipped away at my confidence, until I'd started questioning my own happiness. But something had shifted during those months of wedding planning, when Jake and I realized we were designing a celebration for everyone except ourselves. The photos Sarah sent told a different story than the one my mother was spinning. They captured Jake's grandmother teaching our friends a traditional Irish dance she'd learned decades ago. They showed my college roommate delivering a toast that had everyone in tears of laughter. There was a candid shot of our elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen, Sarah's mother, sharing cake with a group of children we barely knew but who had wandered over from the park, drawn by the music and celebration. These were the moments that mattered, the genuine connections that made our day special in ways no expensive venue could replicate. As I scrolled through image after image of pure joy, I realized something profound had happened on our wedding day. We'd created exactly the celebration we wanted, surrounded by people who loved us unconditionally. The empty chairs where my family should have sat weren't symbols of failure. They were evidence that we'd chosen authenticity over performance. Patricia's absence said more about her values than it did about our worth as a couple or the beauty of our commitment to each other. But even as I recognized this truth, the hurt remained raw and immediate. These were supposed to be the people who loved me most in the world, and they'd chosen appearances over presence, judgment over joy. The weight of their rejection settled over me like a heavy blanket, making it hard to fully embrace the happiness I knew I deserved to feel about the most important day of my life. The silence from my family had stretched for 3 weeks now, But I knew the story Patricia was telling because news travels fast in our tight-knit extended family network. According to my cousin Jessica, who called me yesterday with barely concealed excitement in her voice, my mother had been making the rounds at every family gathering and church function, painting a picture of her rebellious daughter who had chosen to embarrass the Rodriguez name with what she described as a picnic masquerading as a wedding ceremony. My full name is Emma Isabel Rodriguez Thompson now, though Patricia refuses to acknowledge the hyphenated version. At 29, I work as a pediatric nurse at Dell Children's Hospital here in Austin, a job that brings me genuine fulfillment but apparently lacks the prestige my mother expected from her eldest daughter. I met Jake 3 years ago, when I brought my injured rescue dog Luna to the clinic where he works as a veterinary technician. Our relationship grew slowly and naturally, built on shared values and quiet moments rather than the dramatic romance Patricia seemed to think I deserved. For as long as I can remember, my mother has operated under the assumption that appearances matter more than authenticity. Growing up in our modest home in East Austin, she worked tirelessly to project an image of success that often stretched our family's actual resources to the breaking point. Patricia would spend money we didn't have on designer clothes for church, insist we attend every social function at the country club, even though we couldn't afford the membership fees, and constantly compare our family to the wealthier Rodriguez relatives who lived in the prestigious Westlake area of town. The pressure to maintain this facade had shaped every major decision in my life until I met Jake. When I graduated nursing school, Patricia pushed me to apply for positions at private practices in affluent neighborhoods, rather than the pediatric unit at the public hospital where I'd always dreamed of working. When I started dating, she would critique my choices based on their career prospects and family connections, rather than how they treated me or whether we were compatible. Every relationship I'd had before Jake had eventually crumbled under the weight of her expectations and my attempts to please her. Jake represented everything Patricia couldn't understand or control. He came from a middle-class family in San Antonio where his father worked construction and his mother taught elementary school. They lived in the same house for 30 years, drove reliable used cars, and measured success by the strength of their relationships rather than the size of their bank accounts. When Jake proposed with his grandmother's modest emerald ring, instead of the diamond solitaire Patricia had pointed out at the jewelry store, I knew we were heading for conflict. The wedding planning process had been a months-long battle of wills. Patricia wanted us to book the grand ballroom at Hotel Magnifico, the same venue where she'd attended 3 weddings in the past year, each more elaborate than the last. The package started at $15,000, before adding flowers, photography, or upgraded menu options. When I explained that Jake and I were saving for a house down payment and preferred to start our marriage without debt, she offered to pay for the upgrade herself, which I knew meant she'd find a way to make my father cover the costs through overtime shifts at his job managing the warehouse for a medical supply company. Her vision for our wedding read like a magazine spread. She wanted ivory and gold everything, a 10-piece orchestra, assigned seating with calligraphed place cards, and a 7-course plated dinner that would impress her country club friends. She'd compiled Pinterest boards filled with elaborate centerpieces featuring imported flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Every suggestion I made about incorporating personal touches or keeping things simple was met with horror and lectures about what people would think of our family. The breaking point came during a particularly heated discussion at my parents' house 2 months before the wedding. I'd brought photos of the Riverside Community Center, explaining how the outdoor pavilion overlooked the water and how we could use the natural beauty of the setting to create something magical without breaking the bank. Patricia looked at the images as if I'd shown her pictures of a garbage dump. "Emma, this looks like a public park. Your cousins will think we've lost all our money. Aunt Maria will be mortified to tell people where her niece got married." That's when she delivered the ultimatum that would define our relationship forever. "If you insist on this embarrassing spectacle, don't expect your family to participate in what amounts to a backyard barbecue with some flowers thrown around. We have a reputation to protect, and I won't have people thinking the Rodriguez family has forgotten our place in this community." Her words hit me like ice water, but they also clarified something I'd been avoiding for months. This had never been about my happiness or the sacred commitment Jake and I were making to each other. It was about Patricia's image and her need to use my wedding as a display of social status she'd spent decades trying to achieve. The truth about what my family really thought became crystal clear when my cousin Ashley accidentally added me to a group chat that had been active for months. She'd meant to start a separate conversation with me about borrowing my nursing textbooks, but instead included me in the ongoing family discussion titled Emma's Situation. My heart sank as I scrolled up through weeks of messages I was never supposed to see. The conversation revealed a level of coordination and deliberate exclusion that took my breath away. Patricia had been orchestrating the family boycott with the precision of a military campaign, ensuring that every Rodriguez family member understood their role in teaching me what she called a necessary lesson about family expectations and social responsibility. Remember, we're not trying to hurt Emma, Patricia had written in a message from 6 weeks before my wedding. We're helping her understand that choices have consequences. When she realizes that her stubbornness has cost her the support of everyone who loves her, she'll come to her senses about what really matters. This community center nonsense is just a phase brought on by that boy's influence. My brother Carlos had responded with obvious reluctance. Mom, are you sure about this? Emma's been planning this for months. It feels cruel to abandon her on the biggest day of her life. But Patricia's reply shut down any dissent quickly. Carlos, your sister has made it clear that our opinions don't matter to her. She's chosen to disrespect everything our family stands for. Supporting this farce would be enabling her poor judgment and disrespecting your father's hard work to give us the life we have. Sophia's messages revealed the internal struggle she'd been hiding from me during our recent conversations. I keep thinking about how excited Emma was when she found that venue. She showed me pictures of where she wanted to put the ceremony arch, and her face just lit up. Are we really going to miss that because it's not fancy enough? Patricia's response was swift and cutting. Sophia, your sister has always been dramatic. She'll get over the disappointment once she realizes that real family doesn't support decisions that reflect poorly on everyone involved. Mark my words, in 5 years she'll thank us for not enabling this mistake. The most painful messages came from my extended family members, people I'd grown up considering as close as siblings. Aunt Maria, who had been like a second mother to me after my grandmother died, had written, Patricia, I understand your concerns, but Emma is such a sweet girl. Maybe we could attend the ceremony and just skip the reception if it's really that inappropriate? Patricia's reply made my stomach turn. Maria, that would send mixed messages. Emma needs to understand that mediocrity isn't acceptable in our family. Your presence would suggest that her choices are fine when they clearly aren't. We're doing this out of love, even if she can't see it now. Even more disturbing was the level of detail Patricia had shared about Jake and his family. Information she could only have gathered through deliberate investigation. I did some research on the Thompson family, she'd written. The father works construction, which explains a lot about their attitude toward money and presentation. The mother teaches at a public elementary school. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nice people, I'm sure. But they clearly don't understand the importance of making the right impression. Emma has always been influenced too easily by others, and this family is encouraging her worst impulses towards settling for less than she deserves. My cousin Daniel, who had always been the peacemaker in family disputes, had tried one final attempt at reason. Aunt Patricia, what if Emma and Jake are genuinely happy with their plans? Isn't that what matters most? Maybe their wedding will be beautiful in its own way. Patricia's response revealed the depth of her conviction that she knew better than I did about my own life. Daniel, happiness isn't just about feelings in the moment. It's about building a life that others respect and admire. Emma thinks she's being authentic, but she's actually being selfish. She's prioritizing her temporary emotions over the long-term reputation of everyone in this family. The final message in the thread, sent just 2 days before my wedding, sealed their collective decision. Everyone needs to stay strong about this, Patricia had written. I know it feels harsh, but Emma will understand someday that we did this because we love her too much to watch her embarrass herself and us. When she sees how empty those chairs look in her wedding photos, she'll realize what really matters. Sometimes tough love is the only way to show someone the right path. Reading those words felt like discovering that people I'd trusted my entire life had been discussing my most intimate decisions like a business transaction. They'd analyzed my relationship, judged my choices, and determined that their version of love required abandoning me on the most important day of my life. The casual cruelty of their planning, the way they'd convinced themselves that hurting me was actually helping me, left me feeling hollowed out and betrayed in ways I'd never experienced. But perhaps most shocking was the realization that this conversation had been happening parallel to all our normal family interactions. Patricia had been hugging me at Sunday dinners while secretly coordinating my isolation. Sophia had been helping me address invitations while participating in discussions about why the family shouldn't attend. They'd all been living double lives, presenting themselves as loving family members while systematically planning to devastate me. Discovering the group chat was devastating, but it also triggered memories of other times when my family had mysteriously been absent from important moments in my life. Sitting in my kitchen with my phone still open to those cruel messages, I began connecting dots that had been scattered across years of what I'd previously attributed to bad timing or miscommunication. My nursing school graduation came flooding back with new clarity. I'd walked across that stage at the University of Texas at Austin to receive my degree, scanning the audience for familiar faces. Patricia had texted me that morning claiming my father Michael had suddenly fallen ill with food poisoning, making it impossible for any of them to attend. I'd felt terrible for him and guilty for feeling disappointed, especially when I saw classmates celebrating with their entire extended families afterward. Now I wondered if the real reason was that a nursing degree from a state school wasn't prestigious enough to warrant their public support. Then there was my 25th birthday party, which I'd planned as a casual backyard barbecue at the apartment Jake and I had just moved into together. I'd been so excited to introduce him to everyone and show off our first place together, complete with the small garden I'd started and the vintage furniture we'd restored together. One by one, family members had canceled. Sophia claimed she had a work emergency at the bank where she worked as a teller. Carlos said his girlfriend had surprised him with concert tickets. My parents cited a sudden commitment at church that couldn't be rescheduled. Even Aunt Maria, who never missed family celebrations, said she was feeling under the weather. Only Jake's family had shown up, along with a few friends from work and nursing school. His parents had driven 2 hours from San Antonio with homemade tamales and his grandmother's famous tres leches cake. They'd spent the evening asking genuine questions about my job, admiring our little garden, and treating our modest celebration like it was worthy of their time and attention. I'd felt embarrassed that my own family hadn't prioritized the milestone, but Jake's mother had pulled me aside and said something that stuck with me. Mija, the people who show up for your ordinary days are the ones who'll be there for your extraordinary ones too. Looking back now, I could see Patricia's hand in orchestrating these absences. She'd probably painted my birthday party as another example of my poor judgment, choosing Jake's influence over family expectations. The nursing graduation likely didn't fit her narrative of success, especially since she'd wanted me to pursue medical school, or at least work in a private practice rather than pediatric nursing at a public hospital. The pattern extended even further back. My college acceptance to UT Austin had been met with lukewarm enthusiasm because Patricia had hoped I'd attend somewhere more prestigious, perhaps one of the private universities that carried more social weight in her circles. When I'd made Dean's List multiple semesters, she downplayed the achievement because it wasn't from what she considered a top-tier institution. Even my decision to adopt Luna, my rescue dog, had been met with criticism about how pet ownership would limit my social opportunities and professional advancement. Jake had witnessed some of these slights firsthand, though I'd always made excuses for my family's behavior. During our second Christmas together, Patricia had invited us to dinner, but had made pointed comments about Jake's work clothes when he'd come straight from an emergency call at the clinic. She'd questioned why he hadn't pursued veterinary school instead of stopping at the technician level, suggesting that ambition was something she valued in potential family members. When Jake had patiently explained his passion for hands-on animal care and his plans to eventually start his own practice, she'd smiled politely but changed the subject to Carlos's recent promotion at the insurance company where he worked. The most telling incident had happened last spring, when Jake and I had announced our engagement at Sunday dinner. Instead of joy or celebration, Patricia's first question had been about our timeline and budget. When we'd mentioned wanting a year to plan and save money, she'd launched into a lecture about how lengthy engagements suggested uncertainty about commitment. When we'd shared our rough budget estimates, she'd visibly winced and began immediately suggesting ways we could elevate our vision, with family financial assistance that came with strings attached. Even our choice of engagement photographer had been criticized. Sarah Chen was a rising talent in Austin's wedding scene, known for her natural, documentary-style approach that captured authentic moments rather than posed perfection. Patricia had looked at Sarah's portfolio and declared it too casual for a Rodriguez family wedding, suggesting instead a photographer who specialized in formal portraits that could be displayed prominently in family homes and shared in social circles. Michael, my father, had always been caught between supporting his wife's ambitions and maintaining peace with his children. He worked long hours at the medical supply warehouse, often picking up overtime shifts to fund Patricia's vision of their lifestyle. I realize now that his frequent absence from family conflicts wasn't just about avoiding confrontation. It was about the impossible position Patricia put him in by demanding he choose between her expectations and his children's happiness. The accumulation of these memories painted a picture I'd been reluctant to see. My family's love had always been conditional, based on my ability to reflect well on their image and support Patricia's social aspirations. When I'd succeeded at meeting their expectations, I'd been celebrated. When I'd chosen my own path, I'd been subtly punished through withdrawal of support and attention. Standing in my kitchen that morning, surrounded by Sarah's beautiful wedding photos scattered across the counter, something fundamental shifted inside me. The group chat messages were still glowing on my phone screen, each word a reminder of how my family had systematically planned my humiliation while pretending to love me. But instead of the crushing despair I'd expected to feel, a strange sense of clarity began washing over me like cool water on a burn. I walked to our living room window and looked out at the small courtyard where Jake had proposed 6 months earlier. He'd hung fairy lights between the oak trees and filled mason jars with wildflowers from the farmer's market, creating magic out of simplicity and genuine intention. That night, surrounded by Luna's excited barking and the distant sounds of our neighbors' evening routines, he'd told me he wanted to build a life where authenticity mattered more than appearances, where love was measured by presence rather than price tags. For 29 years, I'd been trying to earn approval that would never come. Patricia's love wasn't unconditional. It was transactional, dependent on my ability to serve as a reflection of her own success and social standing. Every achievement I'd earned had been filtered through her lens of what would impress others rather than what brought me fulfillment. Every relationship I'd attempted had been evaluated based on status rather than compatibility. Even my career choice, something that gave my life deep meaning and purpose, had been diminished because it didn't carry the prestige she thought I deserved. The wedding boycott wasn't an anomaly or a moment of poor judgment on Patricia's part. It was the logical conclusion of a lifetime of conditional love, the final demonstration that my worth in her eyes depended entirely on my willingness to prioritize her vision over my own happiness. She'd coordinated this elaborate punishment because she genuinely believed that abandoning me on my wedding day would force me to recognize her authority and submit to her expectations about how I should live my life. But as I stood there looking at photos of our celebration, I realized something that Patricia had never understood. The empty chairs where my family should have sat weren't symbols of failure or evidence that I'd made poor choices. They were proof that Jake and I had created exactly the wedding we wanted, surrounded by people who loved us without conditions or requirements. Every person who had attended our ceremony had chosen to be there because they celebrated our love story, not because they were performing family obligation or social duty. Mrs. Chen, Sarah's elderly mother, had stayed after the ceremony to help us clean up, insisting that young couples needed community support during important transitions. Jake's cousin Tommy had driven his food truck 4 hours from Houston specifically to cater our reception because he believed in making our day special, not because he was trying to impress anyone with expensive cuisine. My coworker Rachel had taken vacation time to be our unofficial wedding coordinator, managing details throughout the day with joy and enthusiasm because she wanted everything to be perfect for us. These people had given us their time, energy, and genuine celebration without expecting anything in return except the privilege of witnessing our commitment to each other. They'd laughed during our unconventional vows, cried during Jake's grandmother's Irish blessing, and danced under the string lights until long after sunset because they understood that love was worth celebrating regardless of the venue or budget. I picked up my phone and began scrolling through the dozens of messages I'd received since Sarah sent the photos. Friends and family members who had attended were sharing their favorite memories from the day, posting pictures I hadn't seen before, and expressing gratitude for being included in something so authentic and meaningful. Jake's aunt had written a long text about how our wedding reminded her why she'd fallen in love with his uncle 30 years ago. My nursing school friend Maya had posted a photo of us laughing during the ceremony with the caption, "This is what real love looks like." The contrast between these genuine expressions of joy and the calculated cruelty of Patricia's group chat couldn't have been clearer. One group had attended our wedding to celebrate love. The other had deliberately avoided it to make a point about social status. One group was building us up and supporting our happiness. The other was trying to tear us down for refusing to meet their arbitrary standards. I realized that I'd been grieving the wrong loss. I'd been mourning the absence of people who had never truly supported me anyway, while failing to fully appreciate the presence of those who had chosen to love me unconditionally. Patricia and the rest of my family had done me an unexpected favor by revealing their true priorities so clearly. Their absence had actually protected our wedding day from the tension and judgment that would have inevitably accompanied their presence. The decision crystallized in my mind with surprising ease. I was done trying to earn love that came with a price tag. I was finished apologizing for choices that brought me genuine happiness, simply because they didn't align with someone else's vision of success. I was through accepting criticism disguised as concern and manipulation presented as family loyalty. For the first time in my adult life, I felt free from the exhausting cycle of seeking approval that would never be freely given. Patricia had played her final card by orchestrating the wedding boycott, expecting it to bring me to my knees with regret and desperation for reconciliation. Instead, it had liberated me from the impossible task of being someone I wasn't in order to satisfy someone who would never be satisfied. I gathered up the wedding photos and began arranging them in the album Sarah had created for us. Each image told the story of a couple surrounded by authentic love and support, beginning their marriage with clarity about what really mattered. Patricia had tried to write a story of failure and embarrassment, but the photos revealed the truth she couldn't control. We had created something beautiful, meaningful, and completely our own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.